Hey guys, welcome back to Sockets and Sideburns. So we have a pretty decent one today. Seized electronic parking brake on this Renault Scenic 3. Now before we go any further in the video, from now on I'm going to be referring to the electronic parking brake as the EPB. Should save us about 5 minutes off the total video time. Now this video is going to go a bit deep, but in my defense I couldn't really find very much information at all on the forums, on YouTube or anywhere else on the net, and I'm aware that this is a very common issue. Now those of you who watched my last video, the channel update, might remember that I said I was expecting a major issue on this Scenic soon. Let this be a lesson to all of us. Shh, silence is golden. So in this video I'm going to show a little bit of diag on this, manually releasing the EPB on the caliper and also replacing the motor on the caliper itself as well. Now this car is a Scenic 3 1.5 DCI, but this should apply to the Megane 3s as well with EPBs on, and potentially some other Renault models as well. So what happened here was the missus came back from netball, pulled up on the drive, turned the car off, the electronic handbrake engaged, and then all hell broke loose. Klaxons blaring, dash lit up like a Christmas tree. You'll get that lovely stop and also the check parking brake warning. I went out to have a look. The EPB still operates. You can hear the motors whirling. Well, actually it was motor, but the car won't move. Now I did use a scanner at this point, but it wouldn't have actually been necessary. I did check everything manually anyway, and all it said was right rear caliper actuator. Just bear in mind though, you may need a scan tool later on to reset any fault codes on the EPB computer. So obviously the car is a mobile on the drive now, and primary objective one is to get that EPB off and released. Now for anyone looking for the manual release in the boot like the Scenic 2s had, don't bother, it's not so easy on these. Manual release is not something that can be done with no tools, but it can be done pretty much anywhere with just a few. So this is the current situation on here. The wiring plugs are disconnected on both sides. Obviously that was done with the EPB released, so the side that was working was actually released. I don't think that would be necessary though, as this side was still working normally, so we could have left it on and had one working handbrake, but it only needed spinning around and reversing into the garage. If it was a long way from home, probably best to leave it on if the system still operates. But this does stop that side then applying automatically when I don't want it to. The servo motor on the C side has been removed and the handbrake has been manually released. So what I'm going to do is put everything back as it was and go through the whole process. The diagnosing is kind of built into getting to the manual release of the EPB anyway, so you'll most likely find the cause of the fault along the way. We really are looking for anything obvious at this point. So now what we want to do first is operate the EPB and listen out for the noise of operation. If neither are making any noise, then the problem is probably the EPB control, in which case you'll really want a scanner, but usually it will just be one side or the other. Just bear in mind that in order to manually operate the EPB with the button, you're going to need the driver's side door closed, I believe, and also the foot brake depressed. Now you can listen out at each wheel for the motors, but even with your ear against the faulty wheel, it can be hard to tell which side is down. I certainly couldn't tell. The best way is to put the back of your hand on the actuator and feel for the vibration of it working. And now that we know which side is down, we can start stripping it. Okay, now I'm going to be removing the wheel to improve access and so that you guys can see much better. There's no need to do this just to do the manual release. There's enough access with the wheel on and it's one less thing to do and maybe far safer that way. Really depends on where the car is actually stuck. These are 17mm, the wheel bolts, just crack them off, quarter turn while it's on the ground. Now saying that, you will want the wheel off for repair as there's a fiddly seal around the back of the caliper to change. If that's not possible or convenient, then you can manage to unseize the handbrake without removing the wheel, then move the car to a more convenient location, which is what was done with this. But it was literally taken off the drive and then reversed into the garage. I would not drive the vehicle far in this condition. So first we're going to want the car on level ground with the front wheels chocked and in first gear. I guess if that's not possible, you'd want someone in the car firmly pressing the brake pedal the entire time. We can't rely on the handbrake to hold the car anymore. Right, jack this side up. And use an axle stand, of course, under the jacking point. And then I'll just bring the jack slightly back into contact, just so that's there as an extra safety. Right, get this wheel off. Right, so the first thing to do under here, we're going to take the connector off of the motor. We're going to slide this red catch back. Now, if it doesn't slide as easily as that, you can just get a small flat blade screwdriver and just gently there, if there's a bit of a gap, so you can get it started and then slide that back. Now, with the catch slid back, we're going to pull on the plug, not on the wires, and it should release. If it doesn't, what you'll find, there's a little grey tab in here. And if you just give it a press, you'll hear a little click, and that's just disengaging the lock that red catch holds. These should slide off easy, just like that. So if yours isn't, just give that grey bit there that the red slide is holding down a little push with a pocket screwdriver. Now, this is our first thing to look at for any signs of corrosion or damage. If it needs a clean, then give it a spray with some contact cleaner now so that it can be dry for refitting. If this is awful in here, then definitely try cleaning it first and then reattach and give the EPB a try again, unless the car has just got to move now, in which case, onwards. Now there are two T27 Torx bolts holding the motor on. Now be warned, these can be a little tight and they do have Loctite on. There's not a lot of access in here at all, and it'll have to be a key because you can't get a socket. You can get one of those long reach sockets on where the bit is actually long, but if it's just a normal length bit on the socket, then it won't do it. So you need to get a key is fine. And with those out, we can just draw the motor off. It might be needing a little wiggle in order to break the seal. There we go. And it was at this point on this car that the fault was revealed. As the motor was taken off, water just came pouring out when it was turned over to be examined. Okay, we'll take a closer look at that motor over on the bench in a minute. But now we can actually release the handbrake. And basically all we're going to be doing is the job of the motor. Now you might think, looking at the motor drive itself, that you need a spline socket for this, but no spline socket actually fits. What you need is either an Allen 7 or a T45, both of which fit snugly. That's a Allen or Hex 7 there, good fit. And a T45 is another good fit. And all we're going to do, I'm going to use a Hex 7, is put that in the recess in the back of the caliper, this spline drive here, where the motor drive goes. And basically this just drives a jacking screw that goes into a plunger which sits inside the pot at the back of the piston, but isn't physically connected to it. You wind the screw in and it's going to draw that plunger back, releasing the push on the piston, thus releasing the handbrake itself. And then if you wind it out, the plunger is pushed out, thus applying the handbrake by applying force to the back of the piston. So to put this really simply, turn this anti-clockwise, lefty-loosey, to apply the handbrake, and clockwise, righty-tighty, to release it. And it really shouldn't be very tight at all. You should just be able to break it loose, easy peasy. Nothing to it there at all. And as we can see now, that's just turning freely. Lefty-loosey, that's going tight, so that's applied, and then that could just be broken loose with your finger. And all I am doing as well, I'm literally just backing this off a quarter turn or so, just so that the handbrake is actually released. Now, if this mechanism is tight, then it may have seized. They should be very easy to move, or maybe if someone has recently changed the rear pads, they may have mangled it by not doing the pad change procedure correctly. The other thing, of course, is it could be the piston actually sticking in the caliper itself. Usually, though, you'd have hot, stinking brakes linked in with that one. Either way, either of those scenarios, it's going to be a whole new cali for that. Okay, with that freed off and moving happily, let's head over to the bench and check out that motor. So, as I said, this motor was full of water when it was taken off. Now, these motors are a very common failure and the usual cause of EPB failure. So that can be another video, stripping this down and seeing what's gone on and how they fail. Another one for our autopsy series. Now, I actually put the motor in this bag here so that I could bring it through the house without causing an environmental disaster. And what's left in here is just a fraction of what actually came out. I'd say that's a pretty conclusive diagnosis right there. But just to be sure, we can find ourselves a 12-volt supply and hook up to it. Just get these far enough apart so that they don't short together. Good contact. And there you go, see, you just had a split second of movement. And then she's completely done. And now doesn't want to move at all. So I'm guessing it's going to be all seized up in here. You'll get the occasional, this is why you might clear off the EPB fault and then just have it come straight back. Now, if this does run perfectly with 12 volts and it didn't on the car, then you probably have a wiring fault on the car itself with that wiring loom, that multi-plug that we just pulled off. Or you might have an intermittent failure, but most likely an intermittent failure is going to show up just like the one did just here, just then, where it will run for a second after it's been left alone for a while, and then just immediately seize back up after a little bit of movement, probably seizing your handbrake back on again. Nope, it's brown bread now. So it used to be that if, or rather when, these motors failed, you had to buy a whole new caliper. But since these are failing so much, people have started supplying just the motor on its own. So I got this one from Amazon, and I'll put a link for it in the description for the video. Now, Renault don't recommend doing this. They recommend replacing the entire caliper assembly, the whole caliper itself. But this is a lot cheaper, a lot quicker, and a lot easier than doing the caliper. So the part number for the old one is... it's just here under where it says Germany if you've got an original. And it's 32338814. And these motors are the same on both sides. All right, let's get this new one fitted on the car. Okay, now to refit. This would be where you'd want to jack up the car and remove the wheel for better access if you hadn't already done it. You may have noticed in the box with the new motor, we got a new seal as well as new bolts, and that's to replace this seal. that goes around the outside here where that motor joins onto. Now, you might be tempted to skip this step, but bear in mind the reason for the failure with this motor anyway was water ingress. And other than water getting in through the casing itself, maybe there's a crack or something, it is a possibility, but this is the only other way for water to get in there. And also bear in mind that the drive on the motor itself was rusted. So this might have been the way it got in past this seal around here. So I'm just going to pop this seal off. I've got a little O-ring tool here, it's a plastic one. You may want to use a pick, but I always use a plastic one if we can get away with it. Let's see if we can. It might not come with a plastic one. Not a lot of space to get under there. Once we get under and get started, we can hook it and pop it out. There we go. So this one's got a nice little hook on it. Get the hook under from the front, and then it pops off nice and easy. Right, then we're just going to give this whole area a clean up, particularly the groove that the seal seats in. Just watch out for the C-clip holding the EPB screw assembly into the piston there. It's pretty tight in there though, but it's also worth pointing out while you're here, is that this area here, where that C-clip is a place where brake fluid can leak. There's an O-ring sealing around the screw assembly which can leak. This one doesn't appear to be, and I haven't topped up the brake fluid in ages on this, but if you have a phantom brake fluid leak that you just can't find anywhere else, this is definitely worth checking here because they can leak from the back there. Let's give this whole area a clean up. That's all the big chunks. It's mostly just dirt. It seems to have made its way in there. Let's get that new seal. Okay, so this is future me from later on in the video after trying to fit the motor on. Basically wasn't going, and the seal is not sitting. It's the seal that's holding it up because it's not sitting well enough in this groove. So all that wire brushing that was done, that was not enough. I'm now in here with a little screwdriver going in this groove, and it is just full of crusty, muddy junk in here in this groove. And obviously if the groove's been made bigger by that, swollen up, then the seal's not going to be as tight into here, which is then not allowing us to get the motor on. So you're going to see me struggle later with that, and then I'm going to cut away, and basically I'm doing this, and then hopefully afterwards you're going to see me just get it straight back on again with any luck. But basically all that wire brushing hasn't done the job. You've really got to get in here and just tear all this out back to bare metal, because it really is that tight a fit. So I'm going to dig all this out, and then I'm going to give it another wire brush, and hopefully the motor will go on easy peasy next time. Okay, we must be nearly there now. Okay, let's fit this seal over. Get it started on one side. The side you can't really see is always the best one. And then just roll it over into the groove. Double check that that is all the way in, all the way around in the groove. Yep. And then I'm just going to put a smidge of silicone grease all around it. Just a little bit on the end of my finger. Just to help that motor slide over there a bit easier. Right, now we can refit the motor. Okay, now we can refit the motor. Now I got new bolts with mine, which are hex instead of Torx. These didn't come with Loctite on, but since I found the old ones with it on, and brake bolts nearly always have Loctite on, I'll just put some on myself. If you're reusing the old bolts, brush the old Loctite off and put some new Loctite on in its place. I'm using Loctite 243 here. Right, first we'll offer this motor up. Get the drive aligned into that spline recess. Push it home. And then get one of your bolts started. One that you can see well. It's always the best choice. Make sure you don't cross thread it. Easy enough to do on something that's not wanting to go in very nicely. Let's get the other one started as well. And then you might just want to back off a smidge so that you're coming on even, so that you're all the way around on that seal even, because it's a very, very tight fit on that seal. If you've misaligned the splines, it should stop pretty obviously, but it's 12 points, so it's pretty easy to get it in. But just keep an eye on that seal, that it doesn't start to be pushed out from around the motor. I'm just grabbing a head torch so that I can see a bit better, make sure that seal doesn't get ejected. Let's have this one out a bit more. Just make sure it's going down even and that the ears that your bolts are going through aren't bending as you do the bolts into them. That'll be an indication that you've run into a solid stop, because these are just plastic. So if they start to bend away from the body of the motor, you'll know that something's binding up. Okay, so as you're going to have seen there was an awful lot of struggling trying to get this on just then. Wasn't the splines going into that recess, what it was the seal, and it just was not going to let the motor pass over it. And basically what I've had to do is pop the seal back off again and take a pocket screwdriver. I'll probably insert that back when I was cleaning it so you can know back then if you're following the video along. But basically I've had to get a pocket screwdriver. There's just so much corrosion, it's unreal. Just full of it. I couldn't believe, the brush wouldn't take it off, but you've had to get a pocket screwdriver in there and it'll just chip away. And I've been going at it for a long, long time. And then basically, finally, the motor's gone on, but it still took a bit of wiggling, sort of start it at the bottom, coax it around at the top, give it a good wiggle, and eventually it'll go on. And what should happen, do not use the bolts to jack this in. Make sure that the face is all the way down from the word go, as in it's just pushed on by hand, because otherwise it'll just bend these ears out and break the new motor itself, which you don't want to do, obviously. So now I'm just going to fit these bolts back in again. But yeah, there's a hell of a lot of cleaning to be done there in order to get this in. But do not force past that seal, because it will just pop out and then you'll deform it and you'll be back to square one before you know it, I expect, if it's deformed. But this motor is now mated down square and the bolts are running almost to the point where they're pinching up. They're not actually doing any of the work to pull this thing in. I managed to get it in by hand in the end. But a hell of a lot of corrosion on there. And then these bolts, they've got Loctite on obviously, but they're going to want to be snug. And just pinch them off with your Allen key. Okay. Right, next we need to put the wiring plug back on the motor. Now sometimes these will not, no matter how far you go, even if you hear that click, that's not going to let that red catch go. So what I'm going to do, pop that back off again. In here you will see there's a black tab, and if you just pull it down, you can see the red, where the red latch is, goes through it. If you just hook it up ever so slightly so that it's started, primed so to speak, on there, you can see you just hook the red latch up from in there. You can then take it in all the way far as you can get it, and then slide the catch in, and that's it, like that. Sometimes that can be the only way. They just won't seem to go on far enough. Make sure that it has engaged and that it is solid on there though, otherwise it will just fall off. This is especially common on, you know, if it's not the original motor. The original motor will be a TRW on these. This one's just off Amazon. They don't quite get their dimensions just right, so you have to do it manually like that. Right, we need to refit the connector on the other side since we took it off. I've given this a good clean round here before we refit, and a little spray with some silicone away from the brakes. Obviously, I just stuck a rag in front of the brakes. And then, there we go, you hear that click. And then we can just slide the catch on. But give it a tug, make sure that it has actually gone on. And just be aware that these connectors, as you've seen in this video so far, these can be a real pig to get on. Just persevere with it, whether it's the catch that's being the problem or whether you're just not quite getting on far enough to hear that click to engage. Persevere. You can't leave them. The catch has to engage because that's what holds it on. So make sure you give it a good tug and that catch has actually got it and it's not coming off. Okay, refit the wheel. $17mm. Get a little pinch on these before we lower them down. Probably won't be able to do much because the handbrake's off. Every time with the nitrile gloves. Every time. Right, we'll lower that back down now and torque up the wheels. Easy girl. And these wheel bolts, 110 NM on these. $113, $109, $110, $108, Right, now with all that done, I've honestly got no idea what the EPB computer is going to do now. Obviously a lot's happened to it and we might have a multitude of faults and the system might still be inactive. Let's just open up the door and see. Yeah, we've still got faults. I didn't really expect otherwise, to be honest. Let's hook up to her and see what she's got to say. Okay, so as you can see, we've still got a flashing light on the parking brake button and the spanner on the dash as well. So we've clearly still got active faults. So I'll scan it now. Okay, so what I want to see, first of all, put the key card in the ignition, is just what actual fault we have on the system. And we've still got the check parking brake as well as a battery low. But we've still got check parking brake on there, so definitely still got a fault. Let's go through and see. We'll just go straight into the EPB, parking brake, read faults. So everything, if you can see now, everything is a memory fault. Nothing is active anymore. Everything is memory. So what I'm going to do, shut off the scan tool and just operate the parking brake button a few times and just see if then the faults will go away themselves. I'll start the car so it'll do a full self-check and we'll see if it will just clear it up itself. So I'll just come out of here now. Fully out of diagnostics. This way, you know that if you repair the fault, you may not actually need a scan tool in order to clear the codes. Let's see. But if they remain even at memory faulting, then obviously you will need a scan tool. Right, let's try starting her up. See if she'll release now. We've still got the flashing light. There we go. Apply parking brake. Parking brake applied. Parking brake on. We do still have that service light though. I wonder if that's just going to be for stored codes. I'm going to go around the back and just feel and see if these two are applying and releasing. Okay, so if we release, yeah, I can feel that one working fine. And then we'll scooch across to the other side. Mind the exhaust fumes while we're here. Right in the face. If we apply and release again, working perfect. Okay, so although both motors are working fine, we still have on the faults, it's not battery charging that's causing the spanner light. It is check parking brake is still a fault. So we'll have to have a look at that now with the code reader. I had hoped that just by fixing the fault you might be able to clear it, but I think you will need a code reader to sort this out in the end. The button itself, that's applied and released. And it's definitely registering it because it's telling us to apply the parking brake again, because we're stationary obviously. It's working fine, just still reading a fault, but it is operating the system. Okay, so although the EPB is running perfectly, we do still have a fault. Still got check parking brake on there and the little orange spanner light. So we'll go in and see what codes it says, whether it's just all those memory codes now, and we'll wipe them off. There might be a way pressing the button down for extended periods of time and pulling it up. I have heard that. I've never personally tried to do it to clear them off, but I really doubt Renault would have made it so that you could do it that way. I think it's far more likely that they would have made it so that you had to actually go into the system and couldn't just... So everything is a memory fault, as we can see there. Manual command memory, right hand, left hand, right hand again, actuator, all memory faults. So let's go in and clear the fault memory. Engine is off. Erasure operation done. And bingo. All we've got left now, what was that? All we've got left, I think, battery low, start engine. That's what you get for putting the ignition on 1,000 times. Checking all this stuff. But the spanner light's gone out, so the fault's gone. Okay, so the only other thing I could think of that you could do if it was still being funny with you is you could run a brake pad replacement procedure, put it into maintenance mode basically, but obviously you wouldn't replace the pads, and that's just going to tell the computer that you've done that, and basically it just initializes the system and does a calibration. It'll wind both motors back, the jacking screws rather, right the way back to 0 first, and then you'll tell the car, you turn it off, turn it back on, tell the car that you've done the brake pad replacement, take it out of maintenance mode, and it will run the motors right out again into contact with force and then retract them to just off. Also, another thing you want to do before you now move the car off or take the chocks away, as I'm about to, make sure you just pump that brake pedal. We haven't interfered with any brake hydraulics at all, but this is just a good habit to get into after any brake work, to be honest. And the next thing I want to do is check that the automatic release is still working properly. But one thing I am going to do, just quick to show you, is if we go into the live data on this, we'll view the data, and we can actually see the measured applications of the rear right-hand caliper and the rear left-hand caliper. And it's the right-hand caliper that we actually worked on. So if we just release them both, you watch those 220s, 0 and 0 again, and if we apply, gone to 17.6 and 17.9. So we know that they're relatively well balanced together, going to about the same position, applying about the same amount of force. Right, now I'll just take the chocks out, disconnect everything, take the chocks out and just make sure that the automatic release works, and then take it out for a spin. Right, let's just listen for that EPB releasing automatically when you go to drive off. There we go. No binding. Alright then guys, that's this job finished. If you've enjoyed this video or it's helped you out at all, then please hit that like button for me. If you'd like to see more videos from the channel in the future, then don't forget to subscribe, and you can find me over on Instagram @SocketsAndSideburns. Thanks for watching guys, I'll see you in the next video.